the Building Decarbonization Coalition, a national organization that is just knocking it out of the park and trying to get a national conversation between manufacturers, policymakers, and the public around how to rapidly decarbonize. I don't want to take any of his time because you're going to enjoy his more than mine, my little spiel here. So, Panama, take it away, buddy.
Great. And are you seeing the right display here? Are you seeing the full screen?
I'm not seeing the full screen yet. I'm seeing your slides, and there you go.
Great.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, Sean. Sarah, I gotta say, I tuned in for the last 15 minutes of your presentation. That was great. I gotta hear a lot more from you. And that's what I love about Sean's events is you have people like Sarah who are on the ground really breaking this new territory of building decarbonization and actually doing it. And then you have people like me who are just talking about it. And what's happening on the policy side. And Sean at these events really brings it together, and it's so encouraging to see it grow every year. And I'm loving that we're almost have 100 people on here right now. So congratulations to Sean, Amanda, the whole rest of the team for putting on this event. It's always a highlight of the year to come to this. Anybody who's on it who's new, you're seeing why. It's an amazing collection of the biggest thinkers and doers in the space, and I'm really honored to be asked to come back again. I only wish I was up in Arcata with all of you enjoying this and all of the side benefits that come from the retreat. So I was asked to talk about the state of building decarbonization. Sean mentioned I'm the director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. We're a coalition of energy providers like utilities and CCAs, manufacturers of water heating equipment and space conditioners, local governments, NGOs, the design and construction community, and we're all working together to completely eliminate emissions from the built environment. We've started out in California. We're just about to be expanding into some other states here pretty soon. Stay tuned for that. So a lot of my remarks today are going to be somewhat California focused, but there's going to be some national and international pieces in it as well. So I'm really honored, and let's get into it. I've chosen a Tale of Two Cities theme for the presentation this year. And so I just want to go over some of the great things that are happening in building decarbonization right now. It truly is the best of times. And we're seeing, the reason why it's the best of times is everything that we're seeing. I'm going to run through those right now. We're seeing rapid expansion of renewable energy. As renewable energy prices have plummeted, we're seeing more and more states adopt renewable energy standards, saying more and more of their electricity is going to be coming from renewable energy across the state, across the country. In California, we're already providing about 65% of our electricity. Last year in 2019 came from non-carbon producing sources. Has a few things in there that as an environmentalist I'm not totally stoked about, like hydro and large nukes, but we'll take it from the carbon dioxide perspective. And so increasingly our grid is getting cleaner, even in places like Indiana. No offense, I have Hoosier relatives, but not real leaders in climate change historically. And so with all that clean electricity we're developing, we're having increasingly better and better electric appliances to be able to use that electricity to be able to replace those gas end uses. And so it's so encouraging that we had two major reports that came out earlier this year from the Sierra Club and from the Rocky Mountain Institute that showed that heat pumps, replacing your water heater or your furnace on the grid mixes across the United States, it's a benefit. It's a greenhouse gas benefit to be putting in all electric appliances, regardless of the grid mix about where you are across the country, compared to relying on natural gas for your water heater or your space heating. And this is due to the increasing efficiency levels that we're getting from our heat pump technologies. So we're getting a lot more clean electricity coming in. We're getting better and better electric technologies. And the beauty is some of the biggest opponents, the home builders, keep on putting out reports like this. In 2018, they put out a report that they themselves said that when you're building a new all-electric building, it's actually the same cost or cheaper for the appliances. And so when you put in all the savings from the infrastructure, it's cheaper to build all electric. So we're getting great, cleaner electricity, better and better technology, and it's coming in cheaper even when you ask the builders to do a major study on it. The other really great thing going on is just the movement. I mean, it's incredible. Like we've never seen growth like this before. I mean, I've been in the energy efficiency and green building field for about 20 years now, and we've never gotten more than just a teeny part of the market share for green buildings. In solar, just a teeny bit of the market share before we finally put the mandate into effect. It took 40 years to get to our solar mandate. And what we're seeing in just 2.5 years of growth for the building and electrification movement is significant market shares in some of our most advanced economies and some of our most advanced cities in the country here in California, and starting to spread to the East Coast as well. Last night, Los Altos became the 35th city in the state of California to adopt an local electrification code. And we're excited to be seeing similar growth starting to happen over on the East Coast. And it's really because of a wide range of activists and activism, scientists and organizers coming together, pushing at all levels of government, with the recognition that there's no way for us to meet our climate goals or our clean air goals without fully decarbonizing our buildings. The other, and what it's really leading to is a recognition that, whereas traditionally with buildings and energy efficiency and green building, it can involve a whole bunch of really complex things, like your energy modeling and what are the VOCs coming from different products and what's the recycled content. And when you talk about building decarbonization, you talk about building electrification, it can be simplified pretty quickly. It can be simplified as we need to first just stop the expansion of the gas network. Stop digging the hole, stop the bleeding, stop making it even worse, stop putting in 60 to 80 year life expectancy infrastructure that's going to tie us to fossil fuels out into the future, so that we can start to address this issue and start to prevent the climate crisis that we're experiencing. The second thing is really simple: phase out fossil fuel appliance sales. Stop selling these things. We know these things are bad for us. They're bad for our indoor air quality, our outdoor air quality, and for our global climate. And so the second big step is just phasing out fossil fuel appliances. And the third is, how do we build the decarbonization marketplace? Right now, if you go and you pick up your phone book, if those of you that still use phone books, call a plumber, call an HVAC technician, chances are they're going to talk you out of trying to put in a heat pump rather than help you on it. And so we need to really be working on developing that alternative. The first two things at the top here are mandates, and policymakers want to know that we have a robust electrification market before they can put these mandates in place. And vice versa, the marketplace wants to think that there's going to be mandates coming and have an idea of that schedule before they start to make some of the changes in their business practices, their business models, and their designs. And so this interrelated understanding is just starting to bubble to the surface right now of just how simple, theoretically, our approach is here. Politically is another thing, but when you look at it from this perspective, it's very much an infrastructure, an appliance, and a market development issue, rather than getting into a lot of the complexity we quite often find ourselves in when we talk about the building space. The other good thing going on is a really bad thing, and that's a growing awareness about the climate crisis and the importance of taking really significant action. You may have already announced it earlier on in the summit. So I'm probably not breaking any new news, but about 3 hours ago, the governor signed an executive order saying we're not going to be selling any more internal combustion vehicles in California after 2035.
What?
Directing.
We didn't talk about that. Holy moly.
Yeah, just signed an executive order at 10:30 saying no more internal combustion engines sold after 2035 in California.
All right.
So the governor is starting to act. He was elected as a climate governor. Ever since he came in, he's been a disappointment on climate. 2 weeks ago, he stood in Butte County in this picture and said that he's going to accelerate all of our leadership on climate change. And today's action as part of Climate Week was the first action for him to take. And we need to be seeing so much more from him. And we need to be seeing leadership from him on buildings in particular, if we're going to be avoiding the climate crisis that we're experiencing. And luckily, we have a proceeding to do exactly that. We have at the Public Utilities Commission a long-term gas proceeding that Commissioner Leanne Randolph, not really the radical on the commission, but the presiding commissioner over this. And this is a picture from Cal Matters, a daily publication out of Sacramento on state policy. And this is the op-ed she wrote about the proceeding, where she said, this is the proceeding where we are going to be planning the state's transition off of natural gas uses in power plants and buildings and in industry. So clearly, probably the most conservative member of the commission clearly putting a stake in the ground that California is getting off gas, and this is the proceeding within which we're going to be doing that planning. And part of that is really going to be focused on the appliances. And last month, the Air Resources Board held a workshop on a new study that they produced. It was developed by the consulting firm E3, and it looked at how do we get to carbon neutrality by 2045. And for the first time in one of the Air Board's pieces of research, it had a significant focus on buildings. Traditionally, it's had a heavy focus on industry and utilities and transportation, and kind of a cursory, really general view on buildings. They have really one staff person, one amazing staff person dedicated to buildings over there, Dana Papke-Waters, Humboldt State graduate. They need so much more because they're about to engage in a lot more activities on buildings. And this is a chart that comes out of the E3 report that looks at the 3 different scenarios that E3 looked at. This is at the water heating piece about when you would have to basically get rid of the entire stock of fossil fuel appliances in order to meet our 2045 target. And what they came at with the findings from that report are, okay, we need to stop selling fossil fuel appliances here in California, probably by 2030 or 2035, if we have any chance to make our 2045 targets. So a clear recognition now within state government and the most powerful air quality agency in the country, if not the world, about needing to phase out the sale of fossil fuel appliances. And more great things happening. As I said, this is now outdated. I finished this presentation last night and it is already outdated. We now have 35 cities that have adopted local codes to either restrict or refuse natural gas infrastructure in some part of new construction within their jurisdiction. We have 40 more underway. San Francisco is going to have a vote in 2 weeks, looking like it's an all-electric reach code. We've seen Oakland's. Oakland looks like they're going for a full Berkeley ban model, so the East Bay leading the way as usual. And the leadership in across California really has happened at the local level. Over at the Energy Commission, they are deep into their Title 24 2022 update right now of the state's energy efficiency building code. And as part of that, they're going to be having a workshop on October 6th about what electrification measures they're going to be proposing to put into the building code, with a follow-up one on November 17th. And on September 30th, for the first time ever, an indoor air quality conference as part of the Title 24 process, where they're going to be examining differentiated standards for ventilation depending on if you're using an electric stove or if you're using a gas stove, and what kind of ventilation you need in order to get the additional pollutants that come from cooking with gas out. So we're seeing an attention on electrification that you never would have expected even from the last code cycle here in 2022. In addition, the CEC is implementing the Senate Bill 1477's build program, which is $80 million, which is going to fund all electric new construction. 80% of that $80 million, I'll have to go back to Sarah for the math on that quickly, is going to be going for only affordable housing projects. And so a real focus and commitment from the state to be making sure the affordable housing development community is really at the front of the line here in our transition to all electric construction. The PUC, meanwhile, is implementing the other part of that 1477 program, the tech program. They're putting out $240 million to a third party to really start to look at a market transformation for electric appliances, with a particular focus on residential and small business. And they're going to be picking a team that's going to be running a comprehensive program across the state about how to transform the market for these appliances. And then we're seeing the Bay Area community choice aggregators start to roll out significant programs for electrification, so that when you add it all together, we have about with programs that are out now from IOUs, investor-owned utilities, local governments, and CCAs. And then if you look at the next 9 months, we have about $450 million in incentives being deployed over the next 5 months, over the next 9 months in California for building decarbonization efforts. The picture you see here on the screen is Darren Klein of PG&E. He's the director for local governments for PG&E, and this is him testifying at the Berkeley City Council meeting on July 9th, when the Berkeley City Council became the first city to adopt a ban on all gas infrastructure. And Darren stood up and said, PG&E wants to support Berkeley and any other city that wants to stop the expansion of PG&E's natural gas network. We know we can't afford to maintain it out into the future, and we know that it doesn't have a role in California's decarbonized future. And since then, PG&E, Southern California Edison, SMUD, the entirety of the state CCAs, the American Institute of Architects, a wide range of environmental justice groups, health groups, and environmental groups have called on the Energy Commission for an all-electric building code in 2022. So PG&E's leadership as a provider of gas, a fourth largest distributor of gas in the country, is unparalleled at this point in calling for all-electric new construction. And it's not just California, as I said. You know, New York City is seeking to move forward with a ban on all new fossil fuel infrastructure. New Jersey has put in place significant goals for cutting natural gas use. Maine has really put everybody to shame with the commitment they've put in about how many heat pumps they want to deploy. You know, we have a number of local governments in Massachusetts trying to implement bans. They're currently being blocked by their attorney general, but that's led to a proceeding at their Public Utilities Commission to instead look at a statewide efforts about how do you start to get off of gas. Seattle weighing their own ban and having trouble with unions up there that I'll talk about in a second. And then Governor Cuomo in New York putting aside of $2 billion, putting aside $500 million for electrification technologies. And then we're seeing it across the pond too, as European countries struggle with their decarbonization goals and not wanting to rely on Russian natural gas or American liquefied natural gas, starting to realize that the solution really is needing to get off gas altogether and start to rely on their increasingly cleaner grid. So it looks good for building decarbonization. It was the best of times, but there was always that other city. And so it's also the worst of times. And the reality is that our governor is afraid when it comes to buildings, and his team is afraid when it comes to buildings as well. The governor came in and his number one issue was housing. And the idea of putting any mandates on housing development is one that they struggle with, even if those mandates led to buildings that are built faster and built cheaper. Still, the idea of mandates is challenging because the builders say they don't want any mandates, and they don't believe that if you don't put in infrastructure, somehow it's cheaper. Governor Newsom, of course, has had to preside over now 2 different fire seasons, the bankruptcy of PG&E and 2 years of public safety power shutoffs as well. And so questions about the grid's resiliency, I think, leads his team to have questions about whether or not we can really have buildings completely rely upon the grid. And lastly, the man's a restaurateur. You know, he owns restaurants, and he said it himself, like he's never seen an electric kitchen before, and just it's hard for him to relate and to know how to do it. And so when the restaurant community comes to him and says, electric restaurants, what? He goes, yeah, totally. I've never seen one either. And so it's going to be a big education effort, both polite education and also rough education with the governor in order to get him to move over to where we need to on building decarbonization. While it's exciting that we're going to be seeing so much action on electrification under the Title 24 update, the reality is that Title 24 has never in any one year made really dramatic jumps. The building industry would disagree, I think, but quite often even the really big jumps, the 20% increases from one code cycle to the next, had years and years of standard development behind it to be able to justify going there. And the reality is building decarbonization is an incredibly new field. And so I think that left to their own devices, the wonderful staff of the Energy Commission would probably be coming with a more incremental approach on electrification rather than what we need in order to face the climate crisis. And the danger really is this. Rocky Mountain Institute put out a blog a couple weeks ago about the dangers of waiting to the next code cycle, the next update to the building code before we adopt all-electric mandate. And what you see here is the cumulative greenhouse gas emission savings, 1 million tons of CO2 that would be saved every year from the buildings that are being built and then operated under the 2022 code, and then the ones that come in the 2025 code in the lighter blue. And so you can see by 2030, if we had adopted an all-electric code in 2022 instead of 2025, we'll save almost 3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and beyond, and about $1 billion of natural gas infrastructure that we won't have to put in the ground and then tear out before the end of its useful life. And so it's incredibly important that we get as much as we can in 2022. And then, unfortunately, we're still seeing the subsidization of the climate crisis. You think about leadership, leadership should be, first and foremost, the state should not be using public dollars, our taxpayer dollars. The dollars that we're paying on the tax money that we're paying to pay off bonds, the money that is coming into the state's coffers from different fees and permits should not be going to make the climate crisis worse. And unfortunately, the agencies you have on the screen are continuing to put out subsidies for natural gas infrastructure. The Strategic Growth Council operates the largest affordable housing program in the country, and there's no restrictions on natural gas in that program. The Office of Public School Construction puts out billions of dollars every year in school construction funds for renovations or retrofits that are matched, usually 2 to 1, 3 to 1 by local funds. We could have significant matching opportunities for school construction here, and there's no restrictions and no alignment with our climate policies with that program. The Public Utilities Commission, they're doing great work on the building decarb side. Unfortunately, we're still putting out subsidies still allowing subsidies to be given out for connecting homes to the gas grid. And the larger the subsidy, the more gas appliances you put in Southern California gas territory, as well as just giving out subsidies for natural gas appliances. And that's completely out of alignment with our climate goals and housing community development. We're going to put out $3 billion of affordable housing money over the next few years. And unless we get this right, it's going to make our climate crisis worse rather than actually helping with it. Our air quality agencies have a significant role to play in starting to crack down on the emissions, on the air quality emissions that come from our appliances. Here in California, our buildings produce 6 times more NOx, more smog-causing pollutants than all of our power plants, and the same amount as all of our cars across car-crazy California. And in some of our air districts, like the Bay Area and the Los Angeles basin, buildings are actually a worse contributor to smog than all of our cars, all of our light-duty vehicles combined. And so it's incredibly important that we start to crack down on this from an air quality perspective as well as climate perspective. And unfortunately, none of the agencies you see up on the screen at this point are stepping up to take the role that they need in cracking down on it. And meanwhile, the forces against us are starting to deploy some of the worst tactics to fight against building decarbonization. The gas interests in their unions are starting to deploy incredible tactics to fight back against building decarbonization. This is a story about the fight down in San Luis Obispo, where union members from SoCalGas threatened to bus in as many of their members as they could, directly threatening expanding the impact of COVID within San Luis Obispo if they didn't stop consideration of a building decarbonization policy. And then Southern California Gas Company started to work with organizations that purported to be fighting for racial justice to send in letters to San Luis Obispo saying that adopting building decarbonization policies were directly discriminatory against communities of color. And when you actually dug into those letters, you found out that the NAACP letter that got sent in was actually never approved by the local president of the NAACP before it was sent in from SoCalGas interests. And the Latino vote letter that got sent in was actually an organization that gets a significant amount of funding from Southern California Gas Company. So we're starting to, just at the very early stages of some of the worst tactics to fight against climate action. And unfortunately, we are still without the support of union labor. On Earth Day this year, the IBEW and AFL-CIO announced a big Earth Day initiative about the future of the energy industry, putting a stake in the ground for the Biden and Harris administration, before we even knew there was going to be a Biden and Harris administration, about what they would expect as union members from an energy policy moving forward. And it was clear that we expect an all of the above approach to energy policy from America's energy workers. And it listed everything, listed wind, it listed carbon capture sequestration, offshore wind, it listed everything except for building electrification. When you looked at it, it was the only major energy policy moving forward that wasn't listed in it. And they had clear language about not having a sacrifice of any single job moving forward. And so one of our biggest challenges moving forward is going to be getting the unions onto our side in this effort. So some of the instances about some of the challenge we have and why in some ways it is still the worst of times in our space. So where do we go from here? You know, the big lessons from the Tale of Two Cities that the Dickens had for the British government was, don't let what happened during the French Revolution happen here in the United Kingdom. And he used language like you reap what you sow. And when you plant seeds that lead to revolutions like that, you can only expect that you will sow them. And for us here right now in 2020, what we're planting is we're planting the seeds of our climate crisis by putting new gas infrastructure in the ground. And so what do we need to do in order to start planting the seeds that are going to grow the kind of communities that we need? They're going to be safe, resilient, and prosperous. We need the things here on the screen, you know, a broad coalition, public campaigns, programs to lower the cost of electrification below that of gas, rate reform to protect ratepayers, particularly low-income ratepayers, a clear ban on gas infrastructure, gas appliances, a phase-out date, a plan for the wind down of the gas system, accessible financing so we can get this done quick and deep, and the end of gas subsidies. That's all. That's it. The good news is that all of these are underway right now and are being worked on, not only in California, but up and down the East Coast as well. The good news is we have exactly what we need in order to make this transition already underway. And I'm so honored to be at a conference with a bunch of the people that are making this happen and led by a leader like Sean and his team that is really providing inspiration and a light for all of us that keep us going. So thank you to everybody for attending the conference. Thank you, Sean, for having me. And thank you all for all the work that you do to bring building decarbonization to a reality. Thank you.
Hey, Panama. You know, Panama was off being an amazing human being over in Europe, and I was begging him to come back earnestly, thinking like, this is exactly what we need in California. Panama comes back and rocks things. He takes it to a huge level of organization. He gets everyone organized. Government laws will get passed, policies will get passed. I'm sure of it. If Panama comes back, they'll save us. And you are. It's one of the best things ever. Love you, man. So you've got some questions over on the side about, you know,
Sure.
your best thinking on financing. Could you give us an answer on that question? What do you think is the best accessible financing strategy, which obviously deals with liquid rate reform, and also deals with environmental racism issues, and yeah.
It's critical. It's a critical justice issue because so much of our communities are cut out from traditional finance, and if we're going to decarbonize at the rate and at the depth that we need to meet our climate crisis, we need significant amounts of private capital, and public capital is not going to be enough. And so we really feel that tariffed on-bill financing has the greatest opportunity to be able to work on this. And we just released a big paper about this in July, and I'll put a link to that paper in the chat. But I will say that the Public Utilities Commission has opened a proceeding on clean energy finance right now, and they've referenced our paper, and tariff on-bill financing is one of the key areas they want to explore in there. So I'll put a link to that in there. But we do not get to our goals in building decarbonization without finance, without accessible finance. Absolutely have to have it. It doesn't drive demand, but it's going to be necessary if we're going to be able to meet our demand.
Fantastic answer. And this is, so please, you know, head over to the chat column if you could, and help out there. There's tons of questions for you. Thank you,
Great,
Panama.
will do.
Hey, Panama.